Early mornings always came too quickly for Maria and Sophia, as if the nights were getting shorter and shorter with each passing week. A thin strip of light crept through the curtains, gently and cautiously touching Maria's cheeks, urging her to wake from the shallow and troubled sleep she always had. Maria opened her eyes and sighed tiredly. It was still early outside. The city was still in a gentle half-sleep, with only the first buses and forgotten silhouettes of people walking from unknown places to be seen on the streets. She felt the familiar heaviness in her body after yesterday's shift, a sore back, tired legs aching from exhaustion, and a tingling in her fingertips from the strong cleaning agent she used daily to scrub the floors and walls. Maria got up, gently looked at Sophia, who was sleeping across from her, and smiled at her tenderly, almost sadly. Her daughter slept surrounded by textbooks and notebooks scattered around her bed in a barricade-like fashion. Maria carefully approached her daughter's desk and lovingly stacked the textbooks, trying not to wake the girl. She shook her head slightly with pride and concern, thinking about how much her daughter was studying and how much effort she was putting into her dream of entering the most prestigious university in the country, UNAM. It was for this dream that Maria was willing to endure any hardship and sacrifice. Washing her face with cold water, she looked into the tiny old mirror above the sink. It reflected a woman who had long stopped worrying about beauty. Only the shadow of worry for her daughter and unshakable determination remained etched on her face. Maria had her hair pulled back in a strict bun, put on her work-worn robe, and began preparing breakfast. Today there was less food than usual as it was the end of the month. She had to stretch their modest savings and save on every detail of their daily life. Just as breakfast was almost ready, a soft yawn came from behind, and Sophia entered the small kitchen. "Good morning, Mom," the girl sleepily said, rubbing her eyes, and sat down at the old table covered with a light blue oilcloth. Maria gently ruffled her chestnut hair and placed a plate of simple omelette in front of her. "Good morning, me Nina. Stayed up late again?" Sophia lowered her eyes apologetically and replied in a quiet voice. "Sorry, Mom. Today was an important history test, and I wanted to prepare." Maria sat next to her, gently laying her hand on Sophia's shoulder. "You don't need to apologize for your dreams, Sophia. They're the most precious thing we have. Just don't forget that you need to rest." The girl smiled and shrugged. "I'll manage, I promise." Breakfast was passed in the usual silence, broken only by the clinking of plates and the clatter of cups. Both knew the day would be long and difficult. Maria would once again spend the whole day at school, cleaning classrooms and hallways, while Sophia had to balance her studies with a few hours of work as an assistant in a small library after school, because every peso mattered to them. After breakfast, Maria carefully saved the remaining food for dinner, put on her old jacket, and left the house with her daughter. The bus stop greeted them with a crowd, cold air, and wind lifting dust around their feet and faces. Maria tightly gripped Sophia's hand, as if afraid of losing her in the vast ocean of people, cars, and noisy voices of Mexico City, a city that seemed both hostile and strangely beautiful. At school, the girl quickly said goodbye to her mother, giving her a tender hug and a light kiss on the cheek. Maria watched her daughter walk away with sadness. She was always amazed at how determined and brave her little girl was. Almost with a guilty conscience, Maria went to the small storage room where the buckets and brushes were kept, her only everyday tools. The day passed slowly. Each room seemed equally dirty, and every swish of the mop felt like an endless repetition. At times, bitterness and regret arose in Maria's heart about the life circumstances that seemed impossible to escape from. Her dream was simple: to give Sophia the chance to soar higher, to break through the heavy sky of poverty that seemed to hang over them forever. At the end of her shift, when the daytime noise had died down, and the school was nearly empty, Maria was cleaning the hallways near the principal's office. She often saw the respected Señor Garcia, the powerful and arrogant man with whom Maria occasionally had short, unpleasant encounters. She always felt that there was something unclean, slippery, and repellent about him. Finished with her work, tired and anxious, Maria returned home late in the evening. Sophia was already waiting for her, studying, with the table lit by the soft orange light of their only lamp. Smiling at her mother, the girl returned to her reading. Maria watched her and thought with hope about the future, wondering if one day they could leave their shabby little apartment. Sophia would become a student at UNAM, and Maria's job as a janitor would only be an unpleasant page in the past. She didn't know how soon fate would put their lives to the test, forcing mother and daughter to face harsh realities, corruption, and injustice. All of that was already waiting for them ahead, but right now, on this night in their little room, Maria and Sophia only thought about their future, unaware that changes were already very close, and that there would be a price to pay for them. Sophia tiredly looked at the clock in the school library. The sun had almost set, and the colorful rays of the sunset illuminated her textbooks, which were neatly arranged nearby. The history teacher had asked her to write an extra report, and she had stayed late at school. The girl looked at the empty rows of books before her and sighed deeply. The school library was the only quiet place where she could study without being distracted by anyone's presence. Soon, Sophia gathered her things and left the library. The long corridors of the school were deserted. Only the soft sound of her own footsteps and the muffled whisper of the wind, flowing through the partially open windows, could be heard. The usual, deliberately calm atmosphere of the empty school in the evening always filled her with a strange sense of solitude and unease. Suddenly, as she passed the principal's office, Sophia slowed her pace. From under the heavy door of Don Sergio's office, a quiet male laugh and muffled voices could be heard. Clearly, the principal was not alone. Sophia was about to move on, not wanting to interrupt the important meeting of the adults, but suddenly she caught a strange mention of money. She froze, instinctively sensing that she should listen for at least a moment. The principal's voice sounded self-satisfied and confident. "You're worrying too much, Raul. No one will check the documents closely. I've arranged everything perfectly. The school budget looks flawless to everyone." A deep, unsure voice replied, nervously. "But what if someone notices? An audit or checks from above? We have huge sums going who knows where." Don Sergio smirked meaningfully. "Relax. Even if someone gets interested, there will always be a couple of foolish teachers to blame. I've been running this school for 10 years, and I know how everything works. No one will dare to dig too deep. I have connections." Sophia's heart skipped a beat, and she tightened her grip on her textbooks. What had she just heard? Could the principal, such a respected and powerful person, really be stealing money meant for their school, for the children, for the teachers, people who desperately needed resources and support? The realization of this unexpected information made Sophia's legs feel weak. Could such a thing really be happening here, in her school? Yes, Sophia knew that corruption was a common issue in their country, but she never imagined it could be happening so close, right before her eyes. On one hand, she wanted to forget what she had heard and simply leave, but on the other hand, the feeling of injustice burned inside her, not allowing her to walk away. She quickly headed home, hoping that the fresh air would calm her down, help her rethink what had happened, and sort through the mixed and turbulent thoughts inside her. On her way home, Sophia couldn't stop thinking about what she had heard, mentally repeating the words of the principal over and over. When she arrived home, Sophia was so shaken that Maria noticed it instantly. "You're pale, daughter. What happened?" Sophia only smiled, forcing a smile. "I'm just tired, Mom. It was a busy day." But the girl couldn't sleep almost all night. She lay in the dark, thinking, remembering everything her mother and she had been through. How much effort her mom had put into making sure Sophia could study here, at this school. She recalled how many times they had been short of money for simple things like notebooks or pens, how the old furniture had never been replaced for years, citing a lack of funding, while the principal enjoyed the money that he didn't deserve. The realization of the injustice kept Sophia awake. She felt she couldn't just forget what she had seen. She knew that her silence would make her an accomplice, even if a silent one. But what could one student do against such a powerful man? She felt fear, struggled with her inner doubts, and then decided that she needed to be sure of what she had seen, gather evidence, and if everything was confirmed, take action. Early the next morning, overcoming fear and anxiety, the girl made a firm decision. As she approached the school, she knew she was acting recklessly but justly. Sophia remembered her mother's words about the need to be honest and strong, that kindness and truth should always stand above personal gain. This thought strengthened her resolve. She would do everything she could to ensure justice prevailed, to show that even a regular schoolgirl had the right to raise her voice against the lies and deceit of adults. Sophia looked up at the gray, stern building of the school, took a deep breath, and stepped inside, not fully realizing yet that her actions would soon change her family's life forever, reveal an entire system of injustice, and change her own fate for good. That early morning, Sophia found herself in an unusual, almost otherworldly state. Even though her eyes were red from sleeplessness, inside her bubbled a beautiful storm, a mix of fear, determination, and the thrill of the unknown. Now that she knew the truth about Don Sergio, every step she took felt like part of an incredible and dangerous adventure. She knew it wasn't enough just to hear about the corruption. She needed irrefutable facts, proof that would expose the principal. After a brief internal struggle, Sophia decided to turn to her friend Paco for help, the eccentric schoolboy whom everyone called the mad genius of high school number 8. Paco was a tall and thin teenager with a constant mop of unruly hair and huge round glasses that always slipped down to the tip of his nose. He spent all his free time fiddling with wires, circuit boards, antique mobile phones, and inventing strange devices, often completely useless but always incredibly original. When Sophia approached him with her request, Paco's eyes immediately lit up with pure excitement. "You want to bring down the big boss, Don Sergio?" He theatrically adjusted his glasses, stared at Sophia, and almost whispered, "Amiga, you'll need my special, exclusive spy kit." Sophia, without hiding her doubt, asked, "Is this safe?" Paco was offended. "Of course, it's safe. 2/3 of the time it even works. And the other third?" "The other third," Paco answered thoughtfully, "maybe even more fun." Sophia sighed, but she had no choice. "All right, show me your gadgets, Agent Paco." The teenager happily rummaged through his huge backpack and dumped a pile of technical junk onto the table. It seemed like he carried around a mini laboratory. "What is all this?" Sophia asked cautiously. Paco began listing them with the seriousness of a true professional. "All right, the heavy artillery of our Super SBX kit. Here we have the gum-like voice recorder, the super discreet camera disguised as a potato chip, and my favorite, the electronic hyperflash scanner for ultra-fast document photocopying." "Did you say scanner?" "Listen, don't nitpick. My grammar's bad, but my tech skills are great." This is how their real, dangerous mission began. For an entire week, Sophia followed Don Sergio's every move, still not fully believing in the seriousness of her actions. She placed the gum recorder under the principal's desk, and the chip camera was discreetly hidden across from the file cabinet, disguised as a piece of discarded junk. There's nothing strange about a little potato chip crumb stuck to the administration's wall, unless, of course, you consider the fact that it's recording everything in ultra-high quality. For some reason, the principal was constantly bothered by this small crumb and repeatedly tried to wipe it off, causing Sophia periodic heart attacks. But the camera continued to work, recording any suspicious gesture or movement. At night, Sophia reviewed the footage, holding her breath to stifle her laughter as she watched the nervous and clumsy actions of the unsuspecting Don Sergio. A few days later, Sophia got hold of some papers that the principal had carelessly left on the secretary's desk. With trembling hands, she used Paco's hyperflash scanner to capture the documents. The scanner suddenly flashed bright lime green and emitted a low hum, like a sound from an intergalactic spaceship. Stopping in fear for a few seconds, Sophia waited for the mysterious device to upload the captured secret documents onto her old mobile phone. Convinced that the mission had succeeded, Sophia decided to take further action and handed the evidence over to a well-known journalist from the city's newspaper La Voz Verdadera. In a small, cluttered office, she was met by a young journalist named Daniela Ramos, who immediately became intrigued by the story. "Do you understand the consequences of this?" Daniela asked, carefully examining the recordings and documents. Sophia nodded resolutely. "My mom always said that hiding the truth is as bad as committing the injustice itself. I'm ready for whatever it takes." A few days later, the city was shaken by a loud headline on the front page of the newspaper. "Corruption in high school, Principal Don Sergio caught stealing school funds." The news stunned the whole school and sparked a wave of panic throughout the institution. Sophia watched as confused and angry teachers hurriedly locked their classrooms, while students eagerly discussed the sensational story. Don Sergio, with wild eyes, raced through the school corridors demanding to know who could have betrayed him. Maria reacted with both pride and terror when she found out that it was her daughter who had decided to take such a dangerous step. In their tiny apartment, there was both joy and deep fear for what lay ahead. They both knew that there was no going back, and that this step would mark a completely new, complex, and dangerous chapter in their lives. Inside, Sophia felt a kind of euphoria. She realized that a simple act of honesty and bravery could change seemingly unchangeable things. But she still didn't fully understand what consequences her desperate act would have, opening the door to a whirlwind of events that could destroy old lives to create new, complex, risky, but honest and brighter ones. The morning when the journalist published Sophia's story about corruption at Don Sergio's school began with an unsettling and chaotic atmosphere in Maria and her daughter's small apartment. Early in the morning, their neighbor, Senora Elena, knocked urgently on the door, waving a newspaper and speaking loudly about Sophia. Maria stepped into the hallway, rubbing her eyes, and froze when she saw the bold headline. Corruption scandal at the school. Director Sergio exposed by senior student Sophia. Maria felt her heart drop into an unknown void, and it tightened with fear. She quickly went back inside, closing the door in front of the curious neighbor, and called out for Sophia. Sophia, can you explain to me what is going on here? Maria asked, her hands trembling as she placed the newspaper on the table. Sophia sleepily walked out of her room, but when she saw the newspaper, she immediately woke up. She lowered her eyes. Mom, I'm sorry, I just couldn't stay silent. I had to. Maria pressed her palm to her forehead and sighed deeply. Dios mío, Sophia, why didn't you tell me earlier? We could have prepared for this. It was at that moment that the tiny, old radio in their kitchen blared the news. Sophia had briefly become the heroine of the day, a symbol of courage in the fight for justice, but the joy was short-lived. Just an hour later, Don Sergio began to retaliate. At 8 a.m., the school principal appeared on live television, surrounded by his diplomas and certificates, and began speaking in a hoarse, emotional voice. I have always acted in the best interest of our students, he said, shrugging and gazing at the camera with a sorrowful expression. Now, a dirty campaign has been launched against me by envious individuals and disgruntled staff who wish to tarnish my reputation. Then he looked away from the camera and continued. But the worst part is that they've involved an innocent girl in their schemes, a gullible student who believed their lies. I'm most concerned about her future. Such youthful mistakes, unfortunately, can ruin her life. This was just the first blow of Don Sergio's counterattack. By afternoon, influential officials, who were his friends, began spreading absurd stories and baseless rumors about Maria's personal life via the media. Soon, local radio stations aired an unbelievable news piece. Journalists had supposedly discovered that Maria had been previously arrested for petty theft, a dark past that she had hidden from her colleagues and employer. Of course, this was pure fabrication, but the rumors spread quickly through the school, plunging her life into chaos and shame. When Maria arrived at work, the atmosphere at the school had completely changed. Teachers looked at her with hostility, turning away and whispering behind her back. Other cleaning staff lowered their eyes, avoiding any interaction. Luis, the head janitor, who was usually polite and cheerful, now spoke to Maria dryly and firmly, telling her that the director had forbidden her from cleaning his office and certain classrooms. Maria felt as though the ground beneath her had vanished. She understood how unstable her world had become. Meanwhile, at school, Sophia noticed a shift as well. Many of her classmates now avoided her, as though she had suddenly become foreign and strange. Her friends maintained an awkward silence. Mr. Raphael, the math teacher, who had always given her excellent grades, now gave her a poor mark for a nearly flawless assignment. When Sophia asked him why, he coldly responded that she was focusing too much on politics and scandals instead of her studies. At home in the evening, both mother and daughter sat in silence, exhausted from the day's events. Maria spoke with concern. Sophia, they're too powerful. We don't have the resources to fight people like them. Sophia sniffled, holding back tears, but her voice was firm and desperate. Mom, if we back down now, we'll show everyone that justice only exists for the rich and powerful. I don't want to live in a world where right and wrong are measured by money and influence. Maria nodded with sadness and pride. I understand, Hija, but you must understand now, our whole life is at risk. Sophia reached over and embraced her mother tightly, asking for forgiveness for all the difficulties they were facing. Maria responded with a strong hug, filled with love and solidarity. They both knew that the decisive moment had arrived, and now someone else would need to step in to protect them from the face of injustice. For the next week, the attacks against them continued. Students mocked Sophia by calling her a politician, and mothers in the street refused to greet Maria. Don Sergio, confident in his victory, smiled smugly from the television screens. It seemed as though the honest, humble people were powerless against the onslaught of fake news and the powerful defenders of the director. But it was at this moment, when it seemed like justice had finally lost, that an unexpected ally reached out to Maria and Sophia, someone who could change the course of events if they were ready to take a desperate, bold step that would ultimately define their fate. Walking through the school gates, Maria felt the heavy, judging gazes of the parents. It seemed like their quiet voices, filled with mindless whispers and false rumors, had turned into some kind of ominous, monotonous buzzing, reminiscent of annoying insects on a summer evening. Maria's heart tightened as she tried to walk quickly, quietly, and unnoticed. But she couldn't escape feeling visible anymore. Once friendly mothers of the students now frowned when they saw her and theatrically moved away, as if afraid of catching some strange illness of honesty and truth, which, according to their logic, Maria now embodied. Once inside the school, Maria immediately noticed the sign, a large red piece of cardboard on the wall near the janitor's closet. She stopped, checked her vision, and read it again. The sign read, "Attention! Staff members are prohibited from discussing issues of corruption, politics, and other topics dangerous to the morality of the school. A special warning for technical staff." Maria smiled a bitter smile, feeling like the heroine of some absurd satirical play. Could it really be that people were so ridiculous and frightened that now official bans were being imposed on discussing Putin-like crimes and revelations? Despite the surreal nature of the situation, Maria couldn't find humor in it. Just recently, Don Sergio, with his disgustingly smug smile, had summoned her to his office and said, "Mrs. Maria, we regret to inform you that due to your questionable moral conduct, you will have to leave our institution unless you personally provide me with a written explanation of your behavior and a public written apology. You must officially admit that you and your daughter misled everyone." Maria had protested, but he had only sneered and added that he had enough influence to ensure no one in the city would ever hire her again if she didn't comply with his demands. His look clearly said, this was an ultimatum. Maria continued her work in silence. Most of her colleagues turned away from her, not out of hatred, but more out of cowardice and a desire to avoid trouble. Only the old colleague and friend, Dona Lupe, who was about 65, with a face marked by many life battles, quietly passed Maria a small chocolate bar and quickly whispered in her ear, "Don't listen to them. We know who's who. Our world is just like that. Heroes are always alone, and scoundrels are united and numerous." Meanwhile, Sophia found it even harder than Maria. Teachers, who had always given her excellent ratings, suddenly turned against her, as if someone had issued an unspoken order to teach the girl not to think too much. She constantly received inexplicable failing grades, non-existent mistakes, and ridiculous comments like her handwriting wasn't expressive enough. Using the school as an absurdist stage for a well-rehearsed play, the students, having adapted to the adults' mood, began teasing Sophia with ridiculous nicknames: Sophia the Detective, Corruption Slayer, and even, more ambiguously, Political Prisoner. Jinya, the local young philosopher and eccentric with thick glasses, gloomily expressed his typical manner. "Sophia, we're the victims of the system. And the system is like the cheese soup in the school cafeteria. No one knows what it's made of, but if you ask too many questions, you might end up with no lunch." Even Paco, her eccentric friend and partner in adventures, seemed downcast by the situation and couldn't cheer Sophia up. He fell into an inexplicable melancholy and, instead of his usual cheerful inventions, created some gloomy mini-version of a bureaucrat robot that monotonously repeated one and the same line in an electronic voice. "Your request is under review. Please wait a month. You must wait and accept. Wait and accept." Sophia agonized over the question. Did I do the right thing? Maybe honesty really wasn't needed. Maybe this world wasn't meant for justice? Every night now seemed like a long, torturous road full of fear and worries. But at the deepest point of despair, when the world seemed like an absurd trap and everything felt lost, Sophia felt a quiet, steel-like resolve stir within her again. She remembered how her mother always insisted, "You must hope until the very end. If you remain silent about injustice, it will never disappear." In the silence of their cramped apartment, hugging her mother, Sophia once again felt that she wasn't alone and decided, no matter how much she had to fight alone against everyone, she wouldn't stop. Meanwhile, the absurd bureaucratic structures continued to operate in their dramatically satirical manner, becoming even more ridiculous against the backdrop of everything that had happened. The next stage of Maria and Sophia's confrontation with this world, full of bureaucrats, cowards, and liars, was already on the horizon. But Sophia knew she wouldn't back down, no matter how absurd or satirical the test ahead might be. It was an early gray morning in Mexico City. The city was slowly waking up, almost reluctantly returning to its usual hustle. Despite the fog and the fine drizzle of rain, Maria had risen long before the alarm. Her heart was pounding anxiously and heavily. She was about to do something she had never dared to do before, something she had been dreading for several days and nights. Sitting at the old kitchen table, Maria slowly, but steadily, repeated the words that were already printed in her mind, as if they had seeped into every cell of her weary body. They were words about honesty, perseverance, courage, and hope, but most importantly, words about the support of her daughter, such a fragile one, but already showing her strength, Sophia. Sitting across from Maria, Sophia's mother suddenly realized that all this time, she had been looking for answers from the people around her, from the approval of society. Forgetting that her true compass was her own moral principles and her daughter's attitude toward her. Closing her eyes for a moment and taking a deep breath, Maria decided there was no more room for fear or retreat. The time had come to speak her truth to the world. That day, the school assembly was called with unusual urgency. All staff and parents of high school students were summoned to the auditorium. Don Sergio, confident in his impending victory, stood in the middle of the stage with the smile of a man with enough connections and money to solve any small problem. For a moment, the hall fell silent, all eyes turned to Maria. Sophia, standing by the far doors of the hall, felt both fear and pride at once when her mother stepped forward. Maria approached the small microphone and, with a pounding heart, looked at the dozens of eyes watching her, some stern, some indifferent, and some disdainful. "Señors and señoritas," she began, barely recognizing her hoarse voice. "Many of you know me only as a simple janitor in this school. I have never spoken in front of an audience, never demanded attention. But now, I must speak. Not for myself, but for the truth. For my daughter Sophia and all the students who have been deceived once and will be deceived again if we remain silent." Maria paused for a moment. The hall was filled with muffled whispers. Someone nervously cleared their throat. The director hid his face with his palm and frowned, showing disdain for the janitor's words. "Yes," Maria continued confidently, her voice gaining strength, the tremor slowly fading. "Yes, we may be poor. We do not shy away from hard work. But neither poverty nor our jobs take away our right to defend justice and honesty. I have seen with my own eyes how respect for people has been replaced by money and bribery. And when my daughter Sophia decided to raise her voice and say aloud what everyone else is silent about, I was scared. I asked her to step back, but now I understand. It would have been wrong to remain silent. Silence is the weapon of those who steal our future." The hall was filled with tense, stunned silence. Some parents and teachers began to exchange awkward glances. Someone cautiously clapped, but quickly stopped, fearing the director's angry gaze. "I confirm all the accusations my daughter Sophia made. Don Sergio used school funds for personal purposes. I am not afraid of his threats. I am not afraid of being fired. Let them fire me tomorrow. Let every one of you condemn me, but I cannot live in a world where my daughter considers injustice normal." She fell silent, her voice catching from emotion and excitement. And then, something Maria had not expected happened. The small gray figure of the old janitor Dona Lupe rose and pointed her finger at the director. "Well said, Hija," she shouted. "Do you think we don't understand? Do you think we're blind? It's the truth. He's done this before. We are all his victims, both the children and the adults." The words of the old janitor became a spark for change. People began whispering indignantly. Someone else shouted accusations at Don Sergio. The hall soon filled with dozens of angry voices. Don Sergio turned pale, futilely trying to calm the crowd with shouts, "You won't prove anything. Who will believe a janitor?" His voice was drowned out by the uproar of people's outrage, indignation, and the slowly dawning realization of the raw truth. It was at this dramatic moment that several police officers in strict black uniforms entered the hall, walking confidently between the rows. Their faces showed determined resolve. They climbed onto the stage and denounced Don Sergio's arrest for embezzlement and fraud, presenting official sealed documents. The hall stood in incredible tension as everyone watched how the director, only minutes ago so powerful and confident, lost all his arrogance and dignity. The heavy hand of the law rested on his shoulder, and the crowd silently watched as the former director was escorted away. The next day, Maria's name appeared in newspapers and television reports throughout Mexico City. Social media exploded with news of her brave speech. Suddenly, the simple janitor had become a symbol of the fight for justice and civic dignity for hundreds of thousands of people. This event changed the lives of Maria and Sophia forever, giving them hope and faith in the truth, the hope that the boldest dreams are always possible if you aren't afraid to fight and speak honestly. When Maria and Sophia returned home after a long, tense day filled with anxiety and incredible exhaustion, their usual small apartment seemed different. The old, cozy couch, the colorful curtain in the kitchen, and even the battered bookshelf, everything suddenly seemed new, clean, and strangely familiar. It was at this moment, for the first time in a long time, that both felt a sense of calm and relief. Maria, taking off her worn suede bag with tired hands, sighed deeply and silently looked at Sophia. The girl responded with a look full of pride, tenderness, and almost imperceptible shyness in front of the newly opened world. They didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but today, their life had changed forever. The following days were an absolute surprise for both Maria and Sophia. The morning after the director's arrest, a crowd of journalists with cameras, microphones, and notebooks gathered outside their home. Maria, who had always been quiet and avoided publicity, was now surrounded by attention from all sides. Neighbors, who just a week ago whispered behind her back, were now smiling and warmly greeting her, as if they had never realized how grateful Maria was for their simple support. Even the stern Senora Elena, the strictest neighbor in the building, unexpectedly brought Maria and Sophia a big pie, quietly saying, "You know, you did what many dream of, but are too afraid to say aloud. I'm sorry if I've been unfair to you before." Life at school transformed drastically. Teachers, who had once mocked, barely greeted, and avoided Sophia, now apologized awkwardly and cautiously offered their help and support for her future studies. The most surprising, and at the same time amusing, was witnessing the strange changes in the behavior of the geography teacher, Don Alonso, who had once been a fierce supporter of the director. Alonso, clearly confused and trying to emphasize his involvement with the right side of events, generously gave Sophia high marks, even when her answers were mediocre, and constantly repeated one phrase with a comically serious expression. "Remember, children, only honesty will lead you to great geographical discoveries." This phrase became something of a meme, and Sophia's classmates could hardly contain their laughter, repeating it incessantly during every break. The greatest surprise for Maria came when she received a job offer a week after the events. The new temporary principal, Senora Leticia, immediately recognizing Maria's integrity and principles, called her into her office and without much ado offered her a position as administrator. A vacancy that had become available after the scandal. "You've shown us all that honesty doesn't depend on social status, salary, or anything else," said the new principal with a smile, watching Maria with surprise. "I'm sure you're the one who will correct the mistakes that have accumulated in the school and improve the lives of our students." At first, Maria couldn't believe how dramatically her fate had changed. Just a week ago, she could have lost her job as a cleaner, and now she had taken the place in the office that was once reserved for important, vain people. Despite Maria's shyness, her incredible sense of responsibility, organization, and deep understanding of the problems of ordinary employees and students immediately made her a truly respected administrator. Meanwhile, new doors were also opening for Sophia. The young girl, whose voice had recently trembled with fear and doubt in the face of public pressure, had received an invitation to participate in a prestigious scientific conference at the National University of UNAM. Renowned professors and scientists expressed their desire to see and hear the famous student who had not only bravely exposed corruption but also actively engaged in social sciences and humanities. Sophia was invited to take special preparatory courses for talented and socially active high school students, with the possibility of later entering the university with a scholarship. The girl, who had dreamed of UNAM since childhood, couldn't believe it was happening until she found herself in an actual university lecture hall, listening to lectures from famous professors. Maria and Sophia's lives had completely changed. Their apartment remained the same, humble and cozy, but the doors to the outside world were now wider open than ever. Along with new opportunities came the realization of their own strength and the importance of every individual's voice. "You know, Mom," Sophia said one quiet evening, sitting across from Maria with a cup of hot chocolate in her hands, "I can hardly believe that not long ago, we were too afraid to even speak a word, right?" Maria silently nodded. "Life taught us a lesson. Sometimes one act changes everything around. The most important thing is to never be afraid to do what you believe in, daughter." A few weeks later, when they visited a small cafe in their neighborhood, an unfamiliar woman unexpectedly approached them with tears in her eyes and said, "I read your story in the newspapers, Senora Maria. You and your daughter inspired us all. Now I know that we don't have to tolerate injustice just because our voices seem quiet and weak. Even the weakest voice can change the world." At that moment, Maria and Sophia realized the most important thing: they would never be the same again, because they had become those who believed most in the power of truth. Several months had passed since the events that had changed Maria and Sophia's lives forever. The sun's early rays gently filtered through the curtains of their small apartment, no longer a symbol of poverty, but one of tranquility and renewal. Maria woke up with a smile on her lips. She had not yet gotten used to the amazing feeling of lightness and security that had become an inseparable part of her daily life. Her new job as the school administrator demanded not only responsibility and discipline, but also incredible humanity, tact, and the ability to listen to others' problems and help solve them. It was something she had observed for a long time only from the outside: endless bureaucratic obstacles, the inability to understand the needs of simple employees and students, but now she was trying to fix it with all her heart. The success and appreciation of the students and their parents became her greatest reward. Maria felt like more than just an administrator. She felt like a true defender of justice within the school walls. Teachers and colleagues who had barely noticed her before now always spoke to her with sincere respect and warmth. In recent days, she noticed that even in the parent committee, which had once been filled with indifference and formalities, there was now a genuine interest in change. The school had decided to create a special anti-corruption committee consisting not only of administrators but also of parents, ordinary teachers, and students, to eliminate the very idea of bribery and kickbacks from school life. Maria felt how the loyalty of people to the principles of justice and solidarity was gradually being restored, and this filled her heart with pride and hope. Sophia still couldn't believe that the university auditorium had become a reality, not just a distant dream. Among the elite circle of students and professors, she was now surrounded by a completely different atmosphere, one where people highly valued courage, individuality, knowledge, and honesty. After all the trials, Sophia threw herself into her studies with doubled enthusiasm, and her abilities noticeably improved day by day. Now, each morning was filled with the expectation of something new, unexplored: lectures, discussions, grand ideas, and bold projects. She became especially captivated by a scientific project on researching corruption as a social and ethical phenomenon. Sophia couldn't remain indifferent to the topic that had changed her own life. She spoke at conferences, explaining to students and professors the importance of not staying silent, of being an active participant in the fight against corruption, which often starts close to home. The young girl from a poor family found herself back in the public eye, but this time in a different role, as someone speaking on behalf of thousands of ordinary people who dream of justice. After a few months, Paco, her loyal friend and adventure partner, received a grant to study in information technology. Half-jokingly, he said to Sophia, "Now, maybe it's time to dedicate your life to a special anti-corruption and inequality agency. I'd invent gadgets and programs for battling bureaucrats, and you'd inspire people with speeches." Sophia always laughed in response, but something in the words of her eccentric friend made her think seriously. Deep down, Sophia understood that it was thanks to their amateur detective work that the major schemer Don Sergio had been exposed. Why not help everyone who faced injustice? Meanwhile, the former director, Don Sergio, sat in jail awaiting a harsh trial. His arrest became a symbol that justice was still possible and that it was sometimes achieved by not the strongest, but the bravest and most honest people. Maria often remembered how difficult and frightening it had been to step into the unknown, to overcome her fear, and to speak the truth, how she had feared the consequences, and how it turned out that this decision had brought incredible relief and positive changes. She told Sophia, "You know, Sophia, it's important to understand. Truth and courage don't always give quick results. You may lose a single battle, but in the end, they always win. They are rewarded, and the harder the path, the more valuable the result." Now, they both knew their story, although it had become a landmark tradition.